Bruxelles,
Madrid.
Hi, I'm Hermine. In this second episode devoted to the significant new challenges facing our societies in Europe, we will seek the insight of experts and observers from all corners of the European Union on the glue that holds a peaceful society together: trust. There has been a gradual erosion of citizens' trust in democratic institutions and the political sphere. While this distrust is not a new phenomenon in Europe, it has grown steadily over recent decades. So, is scepticism becoming our default? Are we doomed to systematic distrust, and how far might this extend? Young people are particularly skeptical, as they seem to feel that the system no longer works for them. Alessandro Rosina, from the Catholic University of Milan, explains.
Among young people, trust in politics tends to remain at relatively low levels, albeit with differences between countries. However, there is a common theme, namely the difficulty in recognizing traditional institutions' ability to provide convincing answers and meet the expectations of younger generations. This is not just a disillusionment with individual parties or leaders, but a broader perception of their inadequacy at ensuring prospects for social mobility, economic security, and forward-looking management of the demographic, environmental, and digital transition.
This seems to be a pivotal element in the low level of confidence, the perception that politicians are not up to the task of addressing the issues facing European societies today. As Spanish analyst and public affairs consultant Antonio García Maldonado explains, there are many of these kinds of challenges causing concern.
Material reasons. I'm thinking about the problems of wages and access to housing, for example, but also less material things, or perhaps just less everyday things, such as all the discourse surrounding climate change, which inevitably leads us towards a pessimism, almost a species-wide one that didn't exist 30 or 40 years ago.
MEP Nicu Ștefănuță, Vice President of the European Parliament, cites some additional reasons for young pessimism.
They are more anxious because we have war at the border. Our international institutions are being dismantled. There is no longer any sense of security. We have inflation. We have the danger of extremism. The list is long, and clearly these things will weigh heavily on our younger generations. I am terrified when I think about my daughter's future.
However, 2023-2024 figures from Gallup polled young European people aged 15 to 29, revealing that not all institutions are subject to the same levels of distrust. If they deeply distrust governments and financial institutions, they still maintain a surprising level of confidence in the integrity of the judicial system, electoral processes, the police, and the military. Of course, a certain degree of skepticism and constructive criticism in civil society is proof of a healthy democracy. This helps our leaders to bring about the necessary changes and earn the trust of citizens. And here I want to point to an interesting fact. There tends to be more dissatisfaction with politics and politicians in prosperous democracies, where open criticism of the government is not only permitted but encouraged. But we don't hear much about political dissatisfaction in Russia or China, do we? But let's go back to our topic. So in rich countries, people who don't trust their politicians usually also don't trust their institutions. That's to say they don't think they're honest, fair, or transparent. Dimitris Katsikis, a Greek psychologist, examines how far this skepticism extends.
We are doomed to distrust only when we are constantly suspicious of everything. This happens because of certain irrational beliefs, as we say in my field of work. These are mechanisms that transform healthy distrust into permanent distrust. It's perfectly fine to be a bit skeptical.
Irrational beliefs are ideas we have about ourselves, others, and the world around us that do not tally with reality. This is where conspiracy theories thrive. And the sense of resentment is made worse among those who feel left behind. When healthy distrust turns into a feeling that the system as a whole no longer works, this discontent can lead to deep social divisions and polarization between the haves and have-nots in society, between regions within a country, even between EU member states. This kind of resentment can cause people to set out to find a better place to live or look for scapegoats, a pattern that has led to some of the worst wars and atrocities in our history. And on social media, there's also a great deal of disinformation and fake news. It's the ideal platform for autocratic governments and radical thinkers to stir up negative feelings and foster a climate of distrust within society. And as fake content becomes more and more convincing, this only adds to the increasingly widespread sense of confusion and distrust, says Bulgarian expert Ivo Emanuilov. He's in charge of the Gates Institute's Laboratory for Experimental Regulation and Digital Policies.
In the context of new technologies, public trust is increasingly undermined, not because the technologies themselves are inherently good or bad, but because of manipulative uses of these technologies. The truth is that, unfortunately, most of the applications of artificial intelligence that we see today contribute to the spread of more and more disinformation in society. I fear that convincing fakes, so-called deepfakes, and manipulation in general, which seems to prevail on social networks used by a large part of the population, pose a significant risk of confusing people about the world we live in and the direction they themselves should take in it.
Jeff Kaufman is a project manager at Be Secure, a Luxembourg government initiative to educate society on the safe and responsible use of media and new technologies. He says that social media is lacking one key thing.
We call this thing gatekeeping. In other words, the process whereby a person would check or validate information before it was released to the public. As such, young people today, because of the internet, have to deal with being presented with news from many different perspectives. This raises the question of who they should trust: established institutions, the mainstream media. Meanwhile, online, there are more and more individual voices or niche communities, which creates a huge number of different currents.
And the way ideas are pushed in social media is also insidious, notes Bulgarian expert Emanuilov.
In many disinformation campaigns, we observe the mixing of half-truths with outright lies. This type of disinformation, this type of manipulation, is most effective because people recognize an element that is publicly known and likely true. Yet they cannot detect the nuances in the language used, which is precisely what misleads and deceives them.
So even though young people may seem a bit naive at first, as they rely on social media and other online sources to stay informed, that doesn't actually mean that they trust all the information they find there. But does this mean that the next generations of Europeans are doomed to distrust? Can things be fixed and trust be restored? Italian professor Rosina thinks that all is not lost.
Young people do not deny the need for institutions, least of all the European institutions, but rather contest their functioning when they perceive them as slow, self-referential, and incapable of creating a credible shared vision. In such cases, trust does not disappear entirely, but it becomes conditional. It is granted to those who show an ability to listen, authenticity, consistency between announcements and results, and the capacity to truly invest in the future of our younger generations.
But it's not just young people who have a lot to learn. One thing our politicians and leaders often forget is that trust is something you have to earn. And how do you earn it? Garcia Maldonado, our Spanish expert, says that the way to do this is to fix citizens' problems.
What I believe is that democracy has to take its role as a problem solver much more seriously and not boast so much about its moral virtues.
If leaders want to build trust and demonstrate that politics serve citizens, then citizens must feel that the state is working for them effectively and fairly. However, here it appears to be more about perception than measurable results. Studies have shown that what people expect for the future, what they hear in the media, their quality of life and their personal finances have a bigger impact than the real figures on the health of the economy. Housing, healthcare and education are the best indicators of how much people trust institutions. And trust drops sharply during visible inflation spikes. Young people in particular feel detached from traditional democracies and are calling for change. However, Professor Rosina argues that this is not necessarily a bad thing.
This detachment does not necessarily coincide with apathy. Young people are interested in experimenting with unconventional forms of civic engagement. They are also willing to mobilize when they feel called upon by goals they consider significant and when they feel part of something that is changing in line with their own values.
Psychologist Katsikis agrees. Young people want to be more, not less involved.
I wish to point out that this fatigue you are talking about actually reflects the exact opposite of what it appears to indicate. It reflects people's desire to participate more in collective decision-making. It expresses their need to be part of building things, rather than being far removed from what we call professional politics.
However, discourses that promise to bring about changes can be misleading. They may promote values and visions that go against the principles and values that we Europeans have long defended. That is what concerns Garcia Maldonado, the risk that young people stop believing in the system and seek alternatives that aren't democratic.
What we are seeing now are challenges to the democratic system itself, to the way in which it operates. And that is what worries me.
Nicu Ștefănuța, the Romanian Green MEP we heard from earlier, won his seat in the European Parliament on the back of your support. He's calling on young people to resist polarization by learning to compromise within society.
Compromise is extremely important, both in politics and in society. Compromise means being able to find common ground, being able to live with someone who is different from you. I often tell young people, for example, that yes, my father posts and sends me videos and TikToks featuring political figures from a completely different part of the political spectrum. But I don't hate my father. I love my father.
We live in an increasingly complex world, faced with political systems that are showing cracks and untamed social media. But young people are keen to take action to keep Europe on the right track. They just need to find the confidence to make the necessary changes for the better. We've mentioned those people who are dissatisfied with their country and its institutions and who are leaving their homeland in search for a better life in Europe. Who are they? Where do they mainly come from? And where are they heading? What drives them? That is the subject of our next episode. Keep an eye out for it. And thank you to all young journalists in this network who work hard to provide trustworthy information. Giulia from Radio 24 in Milan, Aitana from S Radio Castilla y León, Michaela from Radio Romagna, Mariana from Sky Radio in Greece, Katja from Bulgarian National Radio, Jean-Claude from Radio 100.7 in Luxembourg, Auguste from Žinių Radijas in Lithuania, and Wojciech from the podcast The Europeans.